Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Marquita here. I know it has been quite a bit of time since my last regular video. I have been posting my Sunday videos, which are plant-based, related to my balcony garden and aerial gardens and all of the things I do with my house plants. But in terms of these main videos, it's been a minute, and that's just because life has been life and I've been exhausted with my transition back into the classroom that I started back in January, and also managing, working on that graduate certificate, which is now completed. So happy to be done with that and looking forward to the end of the school year. But either way, we are back. And this video is well overdue because this is actually going to be a video about the books that I read in 2025. So I'm just going to be sharing them with you, giving you a brief little chat about each one, not too much, simply because some of them I did already do like separate videos on. So I'm not going to go into a whole deep thing. I'm just going to kind of share it and say what I'd recommend it and kind of point out a few key things that, I liked about it or that you may find interesting as a reader or potential reader. So just want to go through that list just to talk about that. And I want to share with you what I'm currently reading. I'm going to start with a series that I just kind of stumbled upon by being in Barnes and Noble, and I saw the cover of this book, and then I realized it was a series, and I was like, oh, it looks really interesting. So, covers are still a thing. Sometimes we're drawn to books by how they look and by the covers, or maybe even the summaries, but sometimes the covers just catch your attention, and that was the case with this particular series. And this is the Legendborn series. Right now there are currently 3 books in the series. I don't know if there will be a book 4. I was actually about to Google that, but there are 3 books currently out. The third one just came out at the end of last year, I believe, or the beginning of this year, so it is a relatively new book. So if there is a book 4, it'll probably be a little while down the line. But I bought the first 2 together from Barnes and Noble because, as you can see by the sticker, they were having a buy one get one half off. So I was able to get book 1 and 2, and then, like I said, book 3 is a new release, and so I listened to that on Audible. So I own the first 2 in paperback, and my preference of hard copy books are paperback books. So I did not purchase the hardcover of the third book. When it becomes paperback, I will buy it just so I can have the complete series in my possession. But as of right now, it's out on hard copy. So Legendborn, as you can see, is a New York Times bestseller. This is considered like a young adult genre. And the author is Tracy Dion, who is also a Black female author. So that was something else. I was like, this is kind of in the fantasy, I would say, kind of sort of, not really sci-fi, but more so like fantasy. And the fact that it was a Black female, as you can see, this is our main character here. So this is Bree Matthews. She's your main character. And the fact that you had a Black female leading main character and then a Black female author in this particular genre, which I do like, um, drew me in, as well as just the cover itself drew me in. So I really like that. And then when I read the back, the summary sounded really interesting, and there are some ties to the University of North Carolina, so UNC Chapel Hill, and just the state of North Carolina as a whole, which also drew me in because if you are new here and don't know, I am originally from North Carolina, so I like reading books that take place in places that I'm familiar with, or settings I'm familiar with, or have some kind of connection to. That helps me, or that's something that attracts me to a book even more. So that was another piece of it. So just to tell you a little bit about this, Bree Matthews is a 16-year-old girl who gets accepted into kind of like some people call it like Upward Bound, but it's kind of like a pre-college program that's at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, so UNC. And she's 16, and her mother passed away in a car accident. I'm not giving anything away, and I won't give anything away for any of the books. So if you're watching and haven't read it and may want to read it, I'm not going to spoil anything. Anything I'm telling you is either on the summary or just some kind of general information, nothing that's going to spoil the book for you. So her mother dies in a car accident, and so she gets accepted to this program. Um, and she had got accepted, but she never told her mom. And part of the reason that she wants to go, because I think she lived in, I want to say like New York originally, or somewhere she did not live in no, it wasn't New York. It was another small town. And so she wanted to get away. One, she was kind of beefing with her mom. And so she wanted to get far away. You know, as teenagers, sometimes that happens. You want to run away simply from your problems and your mom. And so she had applied to the program, kind of forgot about it, then got accepted. And her and her best friend both applied. And they both got in. And so they are roommates when they go to this because they do get to live on campus at Chapel Hill. So they are getting to mix with, the college students. They get to mix with college life because they're living on the campus. And it's kind of like one of those things where it's like a pre-early college, but then you can also probably attend, more than likely end up going there when you do get ready to go to college because you've had these college level classes already and been exposed to the campus and all of those things. So her mom also attended UNC Chapel Hill. So that's part of why she was into it. Her mom was really smart. She studied like science and some other things. And so Bree doesn't really understand. Her name is Brianna, but she goes by Bree. Bree doesn't really understand why her mom doesn't really want her to go to Chapel Hill. She looks at it as, my mom is trying to keep me away from something. Like, why she went there, why she want me to go? And it sounds like her mom has some things that she's holding back, and Bree doesn't understand what it is. She just looks at it as like most kids would when you want to do something and your parents tell you no, and they don't really give you any reason or a reason where it doesn't seem like it makes sense for them, to be telling you no. And so that's how Bree's feeling. So she's kind of in that rebelling stage, and she's also just angry because it is something she really wants to do. And she's like, why is my mom against something that is actually a good thing? And it's like, you went there, you went to this school, you were like a legend, and you're super smart. So why do you not want me to kind of follow in your footsteps? So she doesn't really understand any of that. Um, but then when she does go, she ends up going to the program because it's just her and her dad now. She's also an only child. So it was just, her and her mom and dad. And they're both dealing with the loss of her mom. Her mom got killed in a car accident, kind of like a freak. It was a freak one car accident. Um, and so when the book first starts, it's introducing you to, like, that moment when someone passes away and you're at the hospital and they take you in that little side room, take the family in that room, and then the doctor comes in and kind of gives the bad news, and they're talking about that. And that's how the book kind of starts off. And so you don't know at the time that there's some significance in how that happens. So I would say if you do decide to read this book, pay attention to what Bree describes is happening when they're telling her or giving her the news of, her mom passing away. And it's going to come back throughout the book and it's going to play a part. But Bree ends up going on to Chapel Hill with her friend. Her best friend's name is Alice, who is Asian, I do believe. But they've been like childhood best friends since forever. And so Bree stumbles on this unintentionally magical kind of, if you like I think Arthur's Table, and the Dark Knight, I mean not Dark Knights, the Round Table, and Night and Arthur's Knights and all that ties into this. Bree finds out that she has a connection there. And as we all know, the traditional story of Arthur and his knights, like, we ain't no black people up in there. So it ties, the author does a great job tying in kind of the story that we know about Arthur and his knights with history such as like slavery, things that happened there, how we end up with, ancestors that are not black, and how lineages and things like that happen, and secrets and all of that. So she ties in real history when it comes to like black people, the South, even some history from UNC Chapel Hill, mixes in with her storyline. So you have like in the author's tape, round table, the knights, kind of how all of these things work. And it's almost like a secret society within the normal society, but like nobody knows except for the members. And I think it's very interesting. It's a good take on some things. And so I love the way she kind of blends actual history with her storyline, but it all makes sense and it all ties in. So I love the way she does that. And she does that throughout all three books. So it deals with and addresses things, but also puts it in here. And with Bree being, UNC Chapel Hill is a PWI, which means a predominantly white institution, thinking about like some of the types of students that attend there, you have students who have many generations of legacy that attend that school, and many generations of legacy when it comes to wealth. and in the South especially. And if you know anything about the campus, a lot of the buildings and some of the statues and things do have ties to either Confederate or slave holding people or Confederate families and members and all of those things. So all of that ties in. Some things on campus will tie in, and you'll see all of that. But one thing that Bree comes to find out is that she meets some interesting people. And I'm just trying to see here. They're called, these people, this group of people, or this secret society, they're called Legend Born, hence the name of the book. And so these are students that hunt creatures, um, demons and all kinds of like bad creatures. So they're like the protectors. So the Legend Born are like good people. Um, and so they have special magic. And there's also Bree, who realizes that she has a connection to this circle, as well as has experienced some of this magic and didn't even realize it. But she comes to realize that there is something, um, and then her memory kind of kicks in, and she tries, and some of these things become connected to her mother's death as well. And so that's kind of how we go on to it. So let's say that she essentially gets connected to these people, or starts kind of hanging with, associating with these people, because she's trying to investigate her mother's death, because she starts to feel like it wasn't just an accident. And so the more that she learns about some of the details and some other things, she starts to feel like maybe her mom was actually killed and it wasn't just an accident. So she's on a mission to kind of find out what she considers the truth about her mother's death. And that's how she ends up tied up with this group. Her mentor that's assigned to her, his name is Nick. And he is also connected to the Legend Born. So he is a college student already, and he's assigned as her mentor. So then they kind of join together on this mission. He's trying to help her out. She explains the things about her mother, and that's where it all goes down. And there's also another friend in there, Nick's friend, who is interesting, and you'll see this character evolve. You can't help but love him. His name is Selwyn, but he goes by Sel. And you'll understand the connection as well. Him and Bree, from the first time they meet, have a very interesting interaction. And with Nick kind of being like the guy that is, he kind of becomes a little bit of a crush for Bree. And then Sel is like the best friend, who's kind of like side-eyeing the whole situation because he feels some kind of way about Bree. So it's a very interesting thing, and the way these relationships develop throughout the series is all very interesting, but it's also they're all teenagers, so keep that in mind. So it plays out like that. Now, sometimes Brie make you want to be like, girl, and, but I think that's also the good part, because sometimes she overthinks, sometimes she does too much, and it does get her into trouble, and sometimes it puts other people in harm's way. But that's her kind of learning about who she is, what she is, and how to navigate all of that. Because just like in any other situation, Bree is a minority. She's a black young woman in a majority white world, in both worlds. And so the same situations, or the same way that most people have that approach, or have these things happen to them when you're the first or you're the only one. And some people aren't happy that you are there, or that you're entering into this, what used to be a sacred white space, and now you are here and you're like that chick on top of that. People have issues with that. So Bree is dealing with that as well. So you have all of that going on, plus, her trying to find her way, and trying to figure out what happened to her mom, what really happened to her mom. So that's book one, is Legend Born. Book two is Bloodmark, so it continues on. And book three is called Oathbound, and that's the one that I read via Audible. So this is book two. I just wanted to show you that it has like this very nice, this also came from Barnes& Noble, but this is a special edition with the like markings on the outside. And also, if you see the character, this again is Bree, and this is Sel, actually, the character I was talking about, Selwyn. So this is the Barnes& Noble's exclusive edition, kind of with the special markings. And you can see this is kind of what it looks like when you're reading the book. I like that as well. I didn't see a special edition of this one, but this is just what it looks like without all of that. So those are the two. And like I said, the third one was on Audible. Next up, we have Who's That Girl, which is by Eve. I also purchased this from Barnes& and Noble, and it is an autographed copy. And that's the main reason, because as I said, I like soft backs or paperbacks, but this is a uh, hardback because it was the only thing that was out, but it does have the autograph. And I've done a separate video talking about this, but this is essentially Eve's memoir here, and it's great. I recommend it. I love Eve. Always loved Eve. And after you read this, I think you will respect her even more. You'll love her even more, especially if you're already a fan. She just tells about her life, what she's been through. And it's very empowering just as a woman. We all know like women in the music business definitely have it 10 times harder than men from just even trying to be heard with their opinions and voices and all of that. And I mean, Beyonce talked about it in her documentary about, and she even gave a prime example of, when she asked for something and the man straight up lied to her and told her it wasn't available when she had already looked it up and knew it was available. And when she showed it to him, he was like, oh, well, and he was like, oh, well, we can't get it like right now, or we'd have to rush her or do whatever. He tried to backtrack and make up an excuse for why he lied to her and told her that they didn't make that particular thing. And so just dealing with that, given we know she's been in the industry since forever, yet people still try to play her face. And Eve talks about that too, about how, even though she is very talented, very smart, and how some of the people tried to take advantage of her because she was a woman. And fortunately, she gives credit to the Rough Riders for really, especially like DMX and the Rough Riders crew, for kind of protecting her in some sense, because they didn't let some of those things happen that would typically happen to some females in the industry. Is, they were kind of like her big brothers, and they made sure that she was protected in some ways, not from everything, but she basically says if it wasn't for them, like things would have been a little worse in some situations than others. But it's because she had them and they supported her. So like if she said she wanted something, they would kind of back her sometimes and kind of make sure that it happened. Whereas without that backing, they may not have happened because people wouldn't give her the same type of respect as they would give like DMX and some of the other males in Rough Riders. So I loved reading about it, love her life, and I just love that like now she's living her soft life as a mom and with her husband and in another country. And life is good for her and she's just relaxed and she's on soft life even. I love that for her. And I think it's a great example. So highly recommend that book as well. Next up, All the Lonely People. As you can see, this was also a Target Book Club book. It's by Mike Gale. And this one is kind of a funny book where, as you can see, the black guy here, he's an older gentleman and they live in, I want to say it was England or in London. He lives in London and he's been there. He was originally from like the Caribbean and he migrated over there for a better life, of course, as a young man. And so that's where he's been living. He marries a lady who is white, which of course during that time, that was a big issue. And then they have two children, a boy and a girl. Um, and so his wife has passed away, so it's just him. His daughter has like this awesome job, and she was like super smart, went to college, did everything. And so she's in Australia, so he's by himself, and he just has a cat. And he's kind of like the grumpy old man. He only had like one bestie that came with him or came over around the same time that he did when they were younger, and then he's lost contact with him too. So he's just kind of holed up in his house, and he just kind of goes about his life with just him and his cat, staying to himself. But when his daughter calls to check in, he makes up these stories about all these friends and how they do different things. So he's giving them names, and he's like, "Yeah, me and this person, like we went out, and these people," and he's created this whole fake life. And then his daughter decides to surprise him and she's like, "Hey dad, like I got some time off, I'm going to come over and see you, spend a little time with you for a little while." And now he's got to figure out, how can I find these imaginary people that I've been telling my daughter all about, um because none of them really exist in the sense that he's been telling. So it's a very interesting story about how he's kind of forced to find some friends to create this illusion or to satisfy this illusion that he has created for his daughter. So it's very funny, but it's also a thoughtful book because it makes you think about like older people as they get people as they age. And even if you have like family, like he definitely had like family in there. He had neighbors, he had people around him, but it says he thought he was all alone in the world until he met his neighbors. He chose to kind of keep to himself because after he lost his wife, he was kind of going through it. And so he kind of shut himself off from the rest of the world. So he kind of only had his kids. You'll see that him and his son don't have the greatest relationship, and you'll understand why. His son does live in London as well, like they're in the same area. But they don't really have that great of a relationship. And it'll talk about that later. So the daughter is kind of like the shining star. She was like, she was the older one. She's like the perfect child or whatever, and she did everything right. So him and his daughter are still kind of close, and so she calls, just like a lot of adult children do, especially after one parent has died and the other parent is kind of living by themselves. She calls like weekly to check in with him, or actually I think it was daily. So like just kind of check in and chat and see how he's doing, and that's when he tells her all these stories about these people that he doesn't really that don't really exist, because he doesn't want her to worry, which is what a lot of parents do. He doesn't want his daughter to be concerned or to worry, and he's even more afraid that she would give her big job and opportunity to come back to be with him, because if she found out he was like by himself and didn't have any friends, that she would definitely not be okay with that. So he tells his story, and we learn about his background. We learn about his history and kind of how he, met his wife and all of that, and how he made it to the levels and the friends that he made. He was a black immigrant from Jamaica, um, and then, kind of went through the times of racism and all of that. Being married to a white lady, her family disowned her, essentially, at least at first, because they weren't cool with it, and they kind of had to hide their relationship before they got married. So it's just a lot of that, things that they dealt with during those times. And then after losing her, kind of what he went through, which I think is normal when people have been married for many, many years, and that's been their partner for their life partner. And then they lose them, and it's kind of like they have to find themselves again without, the love of their lives, essentially. So that's what he's dealing with. And that's why it's called All the Lonely People, because what you end up realizing that even though all these people existed, and they may have had like, family and whatever, they weren't thrown away, but they still were lonely in a sense. So it's a good thought-provoking book when you start thinking about it, but it's also kind of cute and funny as well. So I would recommend this. It's just kind of like I think it was written around the pandemic, so that touched on it kind of even more when you think about like the pandemic and how people were isolated from family and couldn't really communicate in person. Luckily for technology, we weren't completely isolated, but it touches on things like that too. All right, next up we have The House of Eve. And this one was by Sadiqa Johnson. She also wrote a book called Yellow Wife, which I think I have on my Audible. Maybe I'll read that next. Um, and this one is very interesting. Again, it takes place connection to Howard University, connection to kind of DC in that area. So this is kind of a classism and racism type thing embedded in here. And this happens in the 1950s, or starts out in the 1950s. You have Ruby Pearsall is on track to becoming the first in her family to attend college, and that college would be Howard University. And she ends up in a taboo love affair, which threatens to pull her down into the poverty and desperation that has been passed on to her like a birthright. And so she comes from a very, very poor family. So not only would she be the first one to attend college, but like they were like very poor. So like they couldn't have afforded to pay for her to go unless she got a scholarship, which she did because she was smart. Um, and so then there's Eleanor Quarles, who arrives in DC with ambitions and secrets when she meets the handsome William Pride at Howard University, and they fall in love. William is studying, he's pre-med. He comes from a very elite family in DC in a social circle. And there's also the privilege. I believe they're kind of like some light skin, dark skin, so you get the colorism amongst black people, and then also the classism with William's family coming from that elite circle. And then Eleanor, they not poor, but they're like very working class. Like they had to work. They're not by any means generational wealth or anything, but they got a little something. They're working class. And so of course the mama, William's mama, is definitely not happy about that, because she's like, if you don't know anything about the elite circles, and this is black or white, and really any race where you have these, the elite, they date, usually tend to date and marry within those circles. Sometimes it's people that they've known since childhood. And I'm not going to say it's arranged marriage, but it's kind of like your family encourages you to marry within your class, if that makes sense. And that's, I mean, on one hand, you can understand it because both of you are coming from kind of a little bit of money and probably generational wealth in some sense. And so you're at a good starting point and you can build. But also, you could build with somebody who didn't have anything, because if, like this lady or like Eleanor, like even though she's the first in her family, and they were working class, she's going to be something. So she's going to be doing more than her previous generation. And so she gets with somebody like William, they can continue to build on what he has together. And it can bring her family, to a new level, and also keep his family and as elevate his family, because they can create whatever they create together and expand. So it doesn't mean that you have to, or that if you date someone below in the class race that it's going to be different. But in their minds, a lot of times, they want you to stay within your class. And that just is something that we see here, and that happens, like I said, regardless of race. But then you throw in race, and it's even more because the black community sometimes can be like, we really had to go through it to get where we are, and you definitely want to keep it going. You don't want to end up in a situation where you can lose anything, because it's so hard to get to that point and then to keep it and expand on it. So you definitely don't want to set yourself back. But then you see how Ruby, who was our 15-year-old in Philadelphia, how her life and Eleanor's life end up coming together at some point. So it's very interesting. And like I said, I liked it. I thought it was an interesting book. And it's a good bit of historical fiction, because it touches on things during the times, like some of the decisions that are made, some of the thoughts and the ideas are based on the times and how people thought and felt during those times. Again, classism and racism both prevalent in this book with these women. And finally, for my last hardback, I still have a couple more that I read on Audible. We have Everything Is Not Enough. And this one was a part two to In Every Mirror She Is Black. This is part two to that, and I read that one on Audible, and then I purchased this one. I think this is autographed. I think this one is autographed too. Maybe I made that up. Nope, it is. And this, it says, for the strong looking for safe spaces to be weak. So if you read the first part, you read about one of the main characters is about it's multiple stories that tie together because they're all connected to some of the same people, just in different ways. But one of our main characters is this beautiful model, and she ends up marrying this rich guy. Her name is they're in Sweden. So these are black people in Sweden, which again, it's not necessarily a place where, yes, there are black people, but it's predominantly white. So again, we're dealing with black women being in white spaces and being and navigating those things. And that comes with not just in work, but also in their personal lives. And so you have Kimmy, who is with a guy who is black, that is everything she could ever want in a man, but somehow she gets attracted to someone else who's not black, and he's also not technically available. And so you'll find out about that. So she's trying to figure out how to navigate that situation, because she's kind of looking at herself like she's American. She's recruited to this she was recruited to this company in Sweden because she was like the top of her game in America and the best of the best. And so then Sweden company was like, hey, we want you because you're like that chick. But then once she gets there, she solves the problem that they have, and then they're kind of like, okay, we're still gonna pay you. Like, they're paying her very well, and she still has a job, but it's kind of like they just want to keep her there, but not really acknowledge her or give her any um they're paying her what she's worth, but they don't really respect her, and they don't really utilize her and allow her to grow the way that she could. They kind of tap on her when they need her, and after that it's like she's invisible until they need her again. But they are paying her, so that's why she's kind of like, well, I'm getting paid, I'm making money, so that's not an issue, but what do I really want? Like, am I happy with what the situation is? And then we have Brittany, who ends up marrying this very wealthy guy. And she realizes that money is everything. She was a model prior to that, but then she marries this guy who actually has autism. And like people, if you're familiar with people on the spectrum, they like what they like. They have very um, structured, inflexible ways in a lot of cases that they like what they like. They don't like change. They want what they want, they like what they like, and change can be really difficult, especially if it's one that's unexpected or they're not prepared for. And they can also become semi-obsessed with things and sometimes people, as we'll see. So her husband, she's married to this guy. He treats her like a queen. She has money. They've had a little baby girl he adores and she adores. And essentially, if she just wanted to be a kept woman and not have any ambitions for herself, really, this will be the perfect life, but that's not what she wants. And so she's kind of coming to terms with that because she thought that's what she wanted, but now she's realizing, like, hey, like, I like being a wife and a mom, but I also kind of want to do something for me. And her husband is having a hard time with that, and he's not understanding like why she wants to do something, why she wants to work, why she outside of the home, why she wants to do something else, because it's kind of like, I can get you anything you need, so like, what, you don't want for anything. I can make sure that anything you want, I can bring to you. But she realizes that there's more to life, or that she wants more for herself than just that. And so now she's also feeling like, because she finds out about this, and they kind of talk about it in the first story, but she finds out about his ex-girlfriend, and how she realizes that she resembles her in terms of how she looks. So again, tapping into the autism and all of that. And she feels kind of like, well, you married me because I look like or remind you of her. And it's like you are kind of using me as a filler for her. So it's like, do you even love me? Or are you just looking at me as like pretending that I'm her? But wrapping up with everything is not enough. So I was talking about Brittany feeling like she was just holding a placeholder kind of for her husband because she reminded him of his ex. And then finally we have the last person, Yasmin, who was she flee to Sweden for safety purposes. And then she finds her way in society. Like, her dream was to be like a makeup artist, like professionally. And so she is trying to navigate that scene, being again a person of color in a predominantly white area. And she can do hair, she can do makeup, but again, trying to get clients or build a clientele to accept her for who she is and in that community. And so she has a very interesting story as well. And also, she's a mom, has a young child, and then her and her husband kind of have a little bit of issue, not too much. He loves her, adores her. They just have some things they need to work on, like any other relationship. So seeing her story also, and how she also ends up caring for a friend of hers who, in the previous book, it kind of ends with that friend getting injured and ending up in the hospital, and Yasmin is her like next of kin or whatnot. And so that whole story unfolds, and the connection to um some other things. So the books do link together, and I would say, if you haven't read the first one, In Every Mirror If She Is Black, you need to read that first before you read this one, because the story does kind of pick up where that one leaves off, with continuing what happened with these three women's lives. So very good book. And again, this was an autographed copy. I actually picked this up in DC when I was visiting the National Harbor, and I purchased it from Mahogany Books, which is a black-owned bookstore. Highly recommend if you ever visit the National Harbor, DC area. All right, so those were all of my physical books, and I just have a couple of audibles that I want to mention. So one being The Matriarch, which was Tina Knowles, Beyonce Knowles' mother. I did a separate video on that, so I'm not going to do too much. It was also a memoir, and I chose the Audible on purpose because she was the narrator. Tina was the narrator, and it was really like her, sitting down having a conversation with you, telling her story, and we got to learn a lot about her as a person, other than her being Beyonce's mom, and you get to learn a lot more about her and Matthew, which is Beyonce's dad, relationship, and we know like kind of how it ended for the most part, that he ended up having an affair and they split up and whatnot, but it's a whole lot more to it than that, and just kind of how she grew from that experience. And as you know, she also got remarried later on down the line, and she talks about that situation and why they ultimately ended up separating as well, and just kind of what she learned and how she's continuing to grow from all of that, but also just getting to know her backstory, like her as a child, her upbringing, and kind of the expectations and beliefs that her family held, especially regarding like women, and being in the South, of course, too. So you will learn a lot more about Tina, the person, the woman, outside of being Beyonce's mom and Matthew Knowles' wife. So I highly recommend that one. And again, I preferred it on Audible simply for the fact that she was the narrator. And so it's really like her telling her story to you. And the other one that I read on Audible was Happy Land. And that was actually a book that also had ties that I related to, in the sense that it was kind of based on a place in North Carolina. So it talks about this Black community that was there, in the early beginnings, and it was, I'm not gonna say it was a secret community because people knew it was there, black, white, or whatever, but it was for Black people, and the people who ran the town, I guess you could say, or the leadership, they were the kings and queens, so thinking similar, and they kind of settled there, migrated there, so it takes place in North Carolina, and so we kind of bounce back and forth between present and past and present. The author is Dolene Perkins Valdez, who also wrote Take My Hand, which is a book that I also read and absolutely love. Um, and it is based on a true story. So again, historical fiction. Um, so that is why I picked up, or why I selected Happy Land on Audible, because it was by her as well. And I had really enjoyed the first one. So again, this is a historical fiction book. Um, 2, and it takes place in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, in a place in the kingdom of Happy Land. So again, they ran it like it was like a kingdom. You had a king and a queen. Those are your leaders. You had like a kind of similar to where you have like a council, when it came to making decisions and whatnot. So you had your king and a queen, and then you have your council and your citizens and all of that. And so you get the story. So Nikki is one of our main characters. She's the current day. She's the granddaughter of a lady who's living in the land, or living on land from Happy Land, and she is a descendant of these original people who we also get to hear about as well, and they will be telling their story. So we bounce back and forth between the kind of originators of Happy Land, and then we get the descendant, which is Nikki's grandmother, and then we get Nikki, who is the current day. Now Nikki's mom and her grandma had fallen out for some reason, but Nikki doesn't know why, and so the mom kind of left. She left Happy Land, and then so Nikki was raised. They live in like DC, and she's a realtor. And so her grandmother calls her down back to Asheville, and Nikki also has a daughter as well, a teenage daughter. I think she just graduated high school, so she's about to graduate high school. And one of the things they talk about is kind of a generational pattern. So Happy Land was like this kingdom. They had, again, land and people, community, and different themselves. And one of the things is that the families wanted the next generation to stay there and continue to, live there and kind of build up or whatever, or keep the land. And so you see where Nikki's mom has gone or left, and that caused a rift. But one thing that Nikki doesn't understand is, one, what was the fight, or what caused, the tension or the issue, which led to the mom leaving. Or now I think the mom left to go to school, or to attempt to go to school or something. And so she never understands what the division is. And so she doesn't really get to know her grandmother in the way that she would have wanted to. Like, she knows about her. They do have some communication while she's growing up, but she doesn't get that same kind of, if like, if her mom if the mom and the grandma were close, they probably would have a little bit different relationship. So she talks about that. And then now looking at the pattern, Nikki and her mom, they're pretty close. And she says that that's kind of like her mom was compensating for the fact that her and her mom weren't, fell out and whatever. And so she was trying to be, different, which is not unusual in those situations. And then now Nikki and her daughter kind of have that close relationship. And Nikki was married, but then she ends up getting divorced. And so she's essentially a single mother raising her daughter. And she did not go to college. Her mom didn't go, and so she's kind of hoping that her daughter would go because she wants her to go like a little further. And Nikki's kind of like, I did well for myself, even though I didn't go to college. Like she's a successful real estate agent, and so all of them, the women have been successful and been able to kind of hold their own and run things, and even following the ancestral line, like it's a generations of women who have held it down for one reason or another, where the men may have been there at least at some point, and then they either kind of go off, leave, but they're not really gone. They're kind of just in the background, but they're not really the leaders. This is all about like women leading and taking charge because they had to, but it's even in times where traditionally the man would have been the leader. So very interesting story. And it talks about like basically generational situations and how different parts of those things continue on from one generation to the next, and how they can impact decisions we make, relationships between people, just like Nikki saw that relationship with her between her mom and grandmother, and she wanted to make sure that was not the case with her and her daughter. So she tried to keep that, keep them close, and even her mom tried to make sure that they had a pretty decent relationship. So those things are things that carry on through generations, trying to, and you think about like breaking generational curses, just like she wants more for her daughter, even though she's like, I'm not doing too bad, but I want my daughter to do better type thing. um and this is based on, and this is one thing I love about the books I've read so far, by Dolene Perkins Valdez, is that she does tie in actual history with this book. So it is a historical fiction based on real situations. So I'm looking down because I'm reading this summary, but the novel is based on the real life kingdom of Happy Land, which is a community, or was a community, that was established by freed people in the 1870s that lasted for several decades. So again, Nikki's estranged grandmother summons her to North Carolina, where she learns about her ancestor, Queen Luella, and the kingdom, realizing her own identity is tied to its history. So the grandmother has her come back, and then she finds out that there's some things that the grandmother has never shared with her, and that her mom knew and never shared with her either. And so she's kind of like, why didn't my mom ever tell me this? This is kind of important, would have been nice to know and interesting to know. But the grandmother kind of gives her some information about her ancestry and how it ties into the land that the grandmother currently lives on and owns. And so she's asking her granddaughter to help her with some things regarding that, because again, the granddaughter is a real estate agent. And so again, it alternates between Queen Luella, who would be the originator here of this generation because she was part of the founding piece of the kingdom, and then you have the grandmother, and then you have Nikki's mom's not really in it. Then you have Nikki and her daughter, just kind of there. You kind of just to see the connection between the relationship. And so that's what that is. So it's nice, again, look at history, something to look into, and it things, if you're talking about that, land ownership, family legacy, community building, self-sacrifice, and the fight against systematic exploitation, and black land loss. So it does once again tie into some real life situations that have happened with black people and land, and how black people have been tricked into losing their land by whites, and how they have lost their land in some way or another, just from whether it was tricked through lack of education, or just trusting that we're making official business moves and contracts not being held properly, or again the education piece, not understanding how the terms of agreements they're making, things they may be thinking are temporary, end up being permanent. And if you look into that, there are some stats about, how black people lose their land. It's not just through trickery. Some of it is just simply generations not being aware that somebody had some land somewhere and then it gets taken or claimed by other people or whatnot, and just not understanding the rules and regulations behind all those things. So if nothing else, it does bring awareness to that situation, and it also inspires you to kind of be more aware of family history and maybe who owns things. If you come from a family that has land somewhere, especially if you maybe live in the north or somewhere else and you have family in the south, a lot of times that's a big thing. I know my family has a lot of land in terms of, I don't want to say a lot, like we have acres and acres or anything like that, but I mean, they do own land, and like older generations or previous generations had that, and that was something significant that they prided themselves on. So instead of having, I guess, like a trust fund or having money passed down, like physical cash passed down, like I inherited land, just like a lot of people who have especially southern roots, there is land somewhere typically, and a lot of times black families are losing land if they are aware that they have land because they don't want to pay the taxes, or taxes and things like that have gotten so far behind that it's some big amount that they can't pay in the time frame that they have to pay it. And they don't typically find out until somebody has passed away, and then you kind of have like a short period of time to handle all the business of the estate, and it may be more money than they can pay, or it may just be something they don't want to deal with or weren't prepared to deal with, so they get rid of it. And sometimes they don't realize how valuable that land is in terms of location or up and coming things. So that's important to know. And I know there was recently the fight about the land down in South Carolina. There was an older lady that was on some very valuable land that I think a developer wanted. They were trying to buy her out, and she was refusing. Even Tyler Perry stepped in and contribute to her legal defense, paying money so that she could have a legal defense to go against these contractors, because legally they couldn't take it, and they were just trying to continue to harass her to get the land because they wanted to, I think, develop it to build like some kind of tour stuff, like maybe resorts or something like that. And they kind of had it like all around everywhere else, and she's like just sitting there holding this spot. And I think unfortunately she has passed away now, so I'm not sure what the family is doing with it, if they're still continuing to fight or if they sold it. I think they did end up selling. It was just a very nasty situation, so it's similar things to that addressed in this book as well. But those are all the books I read for 2025. Again, let me know if you guys have read any of these or read books by those authors. Thank you for hanging in here with me, because I know it was kind of long, but I did want to recap it because I know spring break and summer are coming up, and a lot of people get into reading when it comes to vacations. So that is everything. And what I'm currently reading is a book called The Hacienda. I'm actually reading the physical copy of that. So here it is. Here you can see my bookmark. I'm about not quite halfway through. You can see from there, but it is pretty good. It is, again, The Hacienda by, her name's on the side, Isabel Canas. The sticker is blocking her last name. And this, again, is a Target signed copy. You know, I love my signed copy here. And I've had this book for a while. It was just on my TBR, which is to be read list. And so I'm just now getting to it. But it's again kind of like in the history thing. It says, in the aftermath of the Mexican War of Independence, a young woman is certain that her wealthy new husband and his remote estate will save her. But something sinister lurks within the hacienda's walls. So just to give you that history, that's the time frame that we're talking about, shortly after the Mexican War of Independence. So we are not in present day. And when it says a young woman certain her wealthy new husband will save her, is because her family, her father was seen as like a traitor because he was going against like the current regime, and so they ended up coming, and her people, her family, they were pretty like well off. I don't know if they were necessarily wealthy, but um they weren't poor. They weren't like average everyday, like poor working. They kind of had nice things. I'd say they were at least like middle class, maybe upper class family. And when her father was seen as a traitor, then they ended up kind of losing everything. And so she ends up marrying someone who still has wealth. And so that's kind of like her come up. And what happened is that her and her mom they had to end up moving with her aunt, who also, um, that family had wealth, and so they were treated kind of like one, with the husband being a traitor, they were looked upon, but they just kind of took pity on them and took them in. And so she was trying to get, being the woman here, which is Isabel, um not Isabel, that's not her name, um Beatrice. Yeah, Beatrice is her name. Beatrice was trying to get away from that whole living situation, and so she marries this guy who has money, and she even talks about the fact that she's a kind of attracted to him, but like she's not in love with him, not in love the way you would want to be in love with someone that you marry. And so she's thinking more of like, this is my way out. And then once I get out, I can bring my mom and we can restore kind of like the family name and all of those things. So she's thinking of more of like an obligation or a duty for her family's sake versus like her true love and happiness. Um, and so she moves into um, this nice house. It's like a mansion, of course, because again, they have money. And her husband, her new husband, works for, I think, the government. And so he's good, comes from a good family. They're very notable family and wealthy family. And so then he's been married before, and his first wife died. And there's kind of like a mystery surrounding what actually happened to her, and they're not really sure. So then as Beatrice moves into the house, and some parts of it are kind of like run down, kind of like you can tell it doesn't have that woman's touch anymore. And so her job is like, she's like, okay, I'm about to make this my house. I'm gonna, has all these plans for renovations and fixing it up and doing all this. But then she starts to find out there's something extra to this house, and it's not a good thing. So that's why it talks about something sinister, because it is. And I'm just kind of getting to the part of where they are discovering this. And again, they are like Catholic, so you have like the exorcism situations or the beliefs in that. And when you're dealing with negative spirits and things like that within the household or in a space. And so she's dealing with that, even though she's not the most religious person. And her dad, I think, told her never trust a priest or whatnot. So they're not like super religious, but she's like, look, something's going on here. It doesn't feel right. The energy is not good. So I need them to come, like, give me a blessing or do something. So she does have to seek out priest assistance. And so she goes to like mass and meets these two priests. So there's Padre Vincent, and there's Padre. There's um one priest who is Andres, and then there's another one who is Vincent, Padre Vincent, and Father Vincent. So Padre Vincent, and Padre Vincent is he's kind of like a grumpy old man. Honestly, that's the vibe he gives, and he does come to the house when she asks for a blessing. Him and Father Andres, who is younger, they both come to the house, and so she's convinced that it's like haunted to some extent or something's there, and she's seen some things and she feels some things. And when she tries to describe it, the older priest, which is Padre Vincent, kind of looks at her. He kind of thinks she's crazy, like she's making things up, but the younger priest does believe her. And they kind of have to work behind his back, because the older guy, he won't even entertain the thought. So he just came and did kind of like throw a little holy water here and there, and give a little basic blessing. And she's like, we need some heavy duty stuff. And so that's kind of where I'm at in the book now, is that the other pastor is like, he believes her. He believed that something was not right. Something deeper than just kind of like general bad energy, bad vibe. It's like, it's a little deeper than that. So that's where I'm at in the book. And so they're trying to figure out what is going on. Padre Andres, the young one, he's becoming her friend, and so he believed her, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna help you out, but we got to do this on the low, because Vincent, he don't like nobody. I think he feels some kind of way about Padre Andres as well. And Padre Andres is not your typical priest. So he also has some little things behind him in a good way. But he also has a backstory. And I think that's why him and Beatrice connect as well, is because they're kind of like atypical people in these situations. And so there's a connection there. So we'll see. But she's going through it, I will say. She better than me, because I would have been up out of there. Actually, I might have been like her. She has things that kind of help her, but I probably would have had set part of that house on fire at the time with sage, from burning sage and other cleansing agents. Because, yeah, I'd be like, we can get the priest, but before they get here, I'm going to have everything burning. I will have a garden of sage because there's some serious stuff going on. But it is a good book if you like, kind of like a, I think when I bought this, it was around Halloween, and so it was kind of like, or close to, and so I was like, oh, this is gonna be like my October Halloween book, blah blah blah. His Hispanic Heritage Month rolling around with that as well, and I just never got to it, so I'm just now getting to it. But I like it so far. It started off a little bit slow, but it was just kind of like they were introducing all of the characters and or the main characters and giving us a little backstory about Beatrice, her family, and then we get a little backstory on Padre Andres before we kind of know who he is, but and her husband. So we get these backstories and that information, and then it kind of taps into the story. Also, her husband has a sister who it's kind of hard to judge how she feels about Beatrice, because when she first meets her, she kind of snubs her, but then one day they kind of get drunk together and they hang out, and I really think the sister likes her, but she don't want to like her. But it's something about Beatrice who is, she's just like, she can handle, me throwing stuff at her and she's gonna throw it back, and so I think that she likes that about her, and she realizes that she is different and that's something she likes, because I think at first the sister's name is Juana. So I think at first, like, Juana was like, I don't like you because you're not on our level. But like I said, I do think that she does like her to some extent. But then she's kind of like, you never know what you're gonna get with her, and so Beatrice is just kind of watching her guard. So she's like, I don't want to like piss her off and push her away, but also I want her to know, like, I am the HBIC. So yeah, so she's trying to find that balance, but it's interesting, and I'm getting into it, and I am enjoying it now. But at first, I was like, I'm not sure how I'm gonna feel about this. I don't think it was anything I was gonna stop reading, but I just didn't know if I was gonna enjoy it. But now it's getting good, so I would recommend it, based on what I've read so far. And again, I'll circle back with it after I actually finish the book, which maybe by the end of the month, because I'm on chapter 13. So I'm just a little under halfway through, and I'm liking what I'm reading. So that is where I'm at. And again, thank you so much for hanging in with me. I should start updating my Goodreads because I have a lot of books I could write on. Maybe I'll do that over spring break, which is coming up soon. But thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. And again, let me know if you read any of the books or read books by those authors that you might want to recommend. Also, drop any other recommendations that you might have in the comments. See you next time.